and Russian-British commentator and comedian, host of the YouTube show Triggernometry, Konstantin Kisin.
So I think we just need to be honest and understand that everybody has security concerns, and we have to listen to each other. And the more the rhetoric ramps up, the harder it is to get together and reach a détente.
Konstantin.
There's a few things I'd say before I answer the question. The first is I've lived in this country since 1995. I'm proud to be British. I've also been proud to be Russian. Russia is a country that's produced some of the greatest works of literature, music, all sorts of things of that nature. But I'm afraid, as I sit here tonight, I feel nothing but shame for my country and for what it's doing. It's a very difficult moment for many people. I have family in Ukraine who are now being bombarded, who are fleeing for their lives. And when I speak to them, one of the things they say to me is how grateful they are to people in Britain for everything that you're doing and for the moral support that your country is providing. So thank you on behalf of everybody there. As for the serious business of what we're talking about, I'm afraid everyone on the panel is refusing to give you an honest answer, because the truth is there's nothing we can do. NATO cannot get involved in this because that would start World War III, which would lead to the annihilation of all of us. NATO cannot provide any more support than what we're already doing. Of course, we can keep supplying ammunition and weapons and so on, which we will do, I'm sure. But this is, I'm afraid, a fight the Ukrainians have to win. The only way this conflict ends is at the negotiating table. The only way for us to get to the negotiating table is for Ukrainians to put up a fight that is strong enough that Putin wants to come to the negotiating table. And at that point, there are ways to make sure that everybody wins at that negotiation. Because, and this is what I've been warning people in the West about, while of course I understand the rhetoric about Vladimir Putin and Russia, we don't want to back him into a corner, because this is existential at this point for him. He knows there's no way back. There's no way back into the international community. There's no way back for Russia to be welcomed. And if that is the case, we're leading him into a very potentially dark path. So we've got to be careful. At the end of the day, this will end in a negotiation. I know that's unpleasant for people to hear, and I'm not talking about appeasement of any kind. We have to make it clear what the consequences will be if he goes any further. But I'm afraid at this point, we can provide support to Ukraine, but they are going to have to win this fight themselves. And
this idea, Konstantin, that Bridget's sort of hinting at in terms of not everyone comfortable with what Putin is doing, perhaps in the upper echelons there is disquiet. There is a sort of hope that the senior people in Moscow might just manage to either overthrow him or somehow divert him into a different course. Is it a false hope in your view?
No, completely false hope. It's not going to happen. He has complete control over the country. He's been in power since 1999. I often tell people, you've got to understand, Vladimir Putin, when he first came to power, we were worried about the millennium bug. So he's had plenty of time to get the country under his control. None of that is going to happen. We have to deal with the real politic of this, and the real politic of this is Ukrainians are going to have to put up a fight. They're going to have to get to the negotiating table, and then at that point, they're going to have to give away things they don't care about, which is Crimea and the two eastern regions. Nobody in Ukraine expects to get those back anyway. And we in the West are going to have to put not promises, but actual things in place that are going to ensure Ukraine's long-term security, so that country cannot be invaded again, more pieces cannot be bitten off it, and that may, in the end, involve some kind of peacekeeping force on that border, I'm afraid.
OK, look, there's a lot of hands up. I'm going to get around as many as I can, just quickly. Yes, you said.
Thank you. I completely agree with what Mr. Christian said, but this is exactly why NATO are wading in now and saying we have to have a no-fly zone, because they're concerned we're going to be dragged into a nuclear war.
But you can't have a no-fly zone. No-fly zone means British and American people shooting down Russian planes. Then you're in World War III, and then you're in nuclear war. You can't have that. We've got to be sensible about it.
But you could have a humanitarian corridor.
That we do.
I don't understand the point you're making.
What you're seeing here, is government and opposition in action. It's democracy in action. Agree, disagree, we can speak in public.
Something else entirely, which is that if Jeremy Corbyn had been elected in 2019, we would be in a worse situation right now.
But if I said what I just said in Russia, I'd be locked up for it. This is a strength, not a weakness.
I'm not suggesting that debate is a bad thing. What I'm suggesting is the point you're making, which is this is all about Tory cuts, is complete nonsense. And I'm no supporter of this government, by the way. But anyway,
there's an alternative, and I'm laying out the alternative.
Let's dispel some other myths, if I may. So the other thing is we've heard is we need to send a message to the people in Russia that blah, blah, blah. People in Russia don't watch BBC Question Time, I'm afraid. They watch Russian national television. That's how most Russians get their news. They're going to be continuing to get fed state propaganda as they have been for the last few weeks. I've been monitoring it. I'm afraid what the people in Russia are being told is that there's a genocide being committed in Ukraine, that NATO is about to invade, that NATO is getting ready to position missiles to strike against the heart of Russia. And no message we send here is going to change that. This is about the situation on the ground in Ukraine that has to be dealt with. It's nothing to do with what we say here on this panel.
And so do you think in terms of oligarchs, for example, and sanctions against them or not?
Well, Putin loves the oligarchs being sent back. He's been demanding this for years. He's wanted to repatriate the money and to get them back into Russia. This isn't going to change anything.
Bridget?
But I still feel that there's a lot of things that can be done by Russians inside Russia or even Russians outside Russia to put pressure and to call out this regime.
And a lot of people with big audiences in Russia, actors, comedians, etc., have been doing this. And so there is a generational split. But my point was the broader public in Russia, 65 to 70%, support what's happening. And the reason they support what's happening is what they're being told on their television screens. I was about to say I agree with Peter entirely until he made that comment there. But I think I broadly agree with him in terms of the visa and the situation. I think with refugees, and remember, some of my family members will be in this position, those who are going to be unsafe in neighbouring countries, those who have family links perhaps with the UK, I think should be allowed to come. But I think in terms of the number of people who are going to be fleeing war, the best place to provide support for them is near the border of Ukraine in Poland, and the Polish people have been incredibly generous. And we can be generous to provide finance and other things in place to support people locally, because not every Ukrainian wants to come to the UK. Quite a lot of them would love to come back to Ukraine once this is hopefully over. So I think we've got to have a calibrated response. Just saying we must throw the borders open to anyone who wants to come isn't going to solve the problem. And by the way, given that we've had 20 years of very large levels of immigration into this country, it will create problems domestically. It will disrupt the fabric of our society, as you know, people have made that point. So I think we've got to make sure that we provide everything we possibly can to people who need it, but that does not necessarily have to be done by bringing people here in huge numbers. There's a way to deal with this locally, and that will be better for the people who we're talking about.
Can I say, I don't think that is the right answer. I think that we do have the capacity to bring more people here.
If pushed, do you think Putin will use nuclear weapons?
Well, let's have a quick run around the panel on this. Konstantin?
100%.
100%?
Of course, if pushed, yeah, if he feels that his life is on the line, of course he'll use nuclear weapons.
So if he felt the war in Ukraine was not going his way, do you think he would use nuclear weapons?
And NATO got involved, yeah.
Bridget? I mean, you've got the advantage of having met the man, which none of the rest of us have.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure the man I met, which was 2001, 2006, well, you know, a while ago, is quite the man that is in charge now, because I never thought he'd do what he's done in the last 2 weeks. Konstantin doesn't agree with me. He thinks he's got enough control that he would be allowed to do something quite as mad as that.
No, I do agree with you. I think there would be people who may try to stop him. Whether they're successful or not is a different question. But you will know, with your time in Russia, that human life has a very different value in Russia than it does in the West, I'm afraid. And so the rationale for making these decisions is different.
And what do you mean by that?
The Russian attitude to human life is that it's less valuable, individual is less sacrosanct. If you look at, you know, the history of Russia, I was actually interviewing a British historian about this today, and he made the point that if you go to the memorial to Soviet soldiers in Berlin, these are people who defeated Nazis, and these great heroes. They're buried in mass graves. They didn't even have the dignity of being buried in their own grave. That is the attitude historically. That's how it's always been. And this is one of the things I'm afraid people in the West really don't understand, and I think you probably do a little bit, is people in that part of the world have a very different moral framework for making these decisions.
But using nuclear weapons is also a self-destruct button, isn't it? Because it doesn't stop there.
But the question was if pushed.
Yes,
right?
but what you're saying is that leaders in Russia have been cavalier with human life of their foot soldiers. I agree, in history that's happened. But if they're thinking about their own survival, to use a nuclear weapon is not a very good strategy to survive. That's where you have to worry. Is he rational now or not?
Quite.
Certainly in Scotland that there is a significant body of support for us not to have nuclear weapons, both within our Parliament in Scotland and in civic society too. And I can only see that feeling growing.
You've been
Look,
putting your
it's
head
not
in
for
your
me to
hands during
decide
that.
whether the people of Scotland have a nuclear weapon, but it's for the people of Scotland. But the idea that in a world where we have nuclear weapons, that we would try and put the toothpaste back in the tube where it's not going to go is absolutely asinine. And the idea that we would stop being able to defend ourselves by having a deterrent in a world where people like Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin have nuclear weapons is completely absurd. It's absurd. We have to have a deterrent. Otherwise, where would Vladimir Putin's troops be today? The only reason they are still in Ukraine and not in Poland is that we have nuclear weapons. It's as simple as that.
And there is also simple. There's another point here, and Ukraine is one of the very few countries in the world that gave up its nuclear weapons.
Yes.
But
It was they were about
the gentleman there should tell you that that's not right.
Well, had them removed, lost its nuclear deterrent itself, and I'm afraid the lesson is stark.
Start giving up the nuclear deterrent when they did it, and we sold them down the river. You're very much mistaken, my friend.
This is why the point I made at the very beginning is very important. However the situation ends up being resolved, the Ukrainian nation has to have not guarantees, not a contract not worth the paper it's written on, but actual protection from further aggression. And we are going to have a very difficult conversation about what that looks like as a country, and as I think NATO and the United States in particular, because if we don't, this will carry on.
Okay. Listen, I really wish we could carry on this conversation. I'm afraid we are out of time.